Hello, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. So if the whole setup and everything looks a little bit different, it's because I'm actually trying a different platform. StreamYard is usually what I use for a lot of these screen share things. And honestly, I haven't made a lot of these videos in a while, but since StreamYard has seen fit to double its price and my yearly subscription is coming to an end in November, I figured it'd be a good time to audition some other platforms. So we're going to give this one a try. I probably will use this for a live stream at some point, but for now, we're just going to use it with this. We'll use it for the good old-fashioned screen share, and I think this will be in 1080p, so there you go. It might be a little bit fancier. So we're giving this a shot. So what I thought I would give this a try with is to do the screen share is that we've got Brian Gray's channel. So this is Big Bry, and I will leave a link in the description for you. He, of course, does the big grandiose thing, as he always does. This is a Big Bry exclusive interview for the first time in over 20 years, where he's interviewing Bill Mastro. This is kind of a second part to the Bill Mastro friendship tour or the goodwill tour or, the redemption tour that he started with Probstein already. So that was a controversial interview. I feel like that was a while ago now. So Big Bry is taking his stab at it. But in traditional Big Bry fashion, it ends up being a very long, drawn-out thing to actually get to the parts that people might actually be interested in. So, as I said, I will include a link in the description for you if you would like to hear the entire thing. And normally, if you can look at it, you can see the runtime is over 2 hours. So if this was kind of an old school reaction video, I would literally be dissecting it section by section, and somehow this video would wind up being longer than 2 hours. But I think it says something that I don't know what the runtime is going to end up being on this, but I guarantee you it's not going to be anywhere near 2 hours. It's going to be a lot shorter, and that's because honestly, there isn't a lot of meat to this. The majority of the conversation is Brian Gray finding little ways of humble bragging about different things, talking about how he doesn't care what people think, and then I'll get to the part that's important because it's going to start right here, right at about 1 hour and 6 minutes. And one thing I'll recommend to you is that if you do decide to go listen to it unfiltered, unedited, with no commentary at all, from myself or anybody else, if you do want to check it out, I recommend that you can listen to it as a podcast. They don't really show anything on the screen, it's just the two of them talking. So if you want to listen to it as a podcast, I would listen to it while I was on the treadmill, just walking. So obviously you can definitely do it and you'll get pretty much the entire thing out of it. So it's pretty good from that perspective. I will say it is good if you're kind of the hobby historian persuasion, if you want to know a little bit about the history, because Bill Mastro, for better or worse, is part of the history of the hobby. And I will say that from that perspective, it is interesting to get his perspective on what happened with the Wagner, because that's the part I'm going to skip you ahead to. That's the part I think most people are interested in. He doesn't talk about basically what got him thrown in jail, but he does spend a little bit of time here talking about the Wagner, also gives his background. And that's the reason why I say, and I'll mention it again at the end, a good chunk of this is kind of the Bill Mastro Goodwill Tour, and this is Brian Gray trying to help, his buddy come off a little bit better because it's the humanizing version of Bill Mastro. We talk about Bill Mastro the collector, Bill Mastro, that was involved in the history of the hobby, kind of interweaves it. And where it gets interesting is at the end, where it basically becomes them trying to reinvent the definition of trimming, where it'll come up here. But let's start off with this piece. This will be the section here where he starts talking about how he came to hear about the infamous T206 Honus Wagner, the PSA 8. That was the first PSA card ever graded. And then also a little bit of details related to that. I will say it doesn't materially change the story, even though they spend an inordinate amount of time saying that the card and the articles written about it were all like the slanderous campaign to hurt Bill Mastro, and they're all lies. But in reality, like the majority of the story he says is just giving a little flavor to kind of what we already knew and or suspected. But nonetheless, so let me hit play here from this point. Again, the link will be in the description if you want to listen to the whole thing. He starts talking about the Honus Wagner right at about the 1 hour 6 minute mark. So right about from where we're about to hit play. Here we go.
And of course, I sold it. I sold them all. And but if you fast forward to 1986, so I'm at the Philadelphia convention, and a guy named Jay Zimmerman from Long Island, a guy I knew real well, he comes running up to me and he goes, Bill, Bob Sepchuk, who has a store on Long Island, he has a Honus Wagner card. It's in mint condition, and he has sent me down here to approach you, Lou Lipset, and Barry Halper to buy the card if you want it. It's $25,000. And I go, it's mint condition. And he goes, yes, it's mint condition. He tells me it's mint. And I said, wow, I said, okay, I'll take it. I said, have you contacted Halper or Lipset yet? No. Okay, don't bother. It's over. I said, give me Sepchuk's number. I'm going to call him. And when I get done with the show here on Sunday, Rob Lifson and I are going to drive up to Long Island, and I'm going to give him the money in cash and pick up the card. He goes, really? I said, yeah. I said, you say it's mint? I'm in. It's mine. I own it. And so Lipson and I did everything back then. We were attached to the hip. We don't talk anymore. That's another story. But we drove all the way to Long Island with the idea of buying this mint condition Honus Wagner card. And so we get there, and I call Sevchuk on the phone, and he says, no. He goes, just you come in, no one else to the store. Well, I said, hello, Rob, you have to wait here, in the car. And I go inside, and there's Sevchuk standing there with another guy, okay, who I don't know, and I'm not introduced to him. And there's a pile of cards on the counter. They're all T206s. And he goes, here it is. And he shows me the Wagner card. And the card, it looks like a football. It's huge. It's got giant curved, but whoever, and I'm looking at the cards, I can realize that this collection in front of me was once an uncut sheet that someone has cut up. And because they knew the Wagner card was valuable, they cut it with huge bowed borders. Okay.
So much that you saw the next card?
Well, no, you could see the cards were all hand cut, and there was a pile of them.
When you say huge, you're talking about like maybe they're a half inch too big overall, or
there was obviously he had gone into the borders of the card next to
okay,
it.
good. That's what I was curious.
It was huge. It was very, very large, but the borders were like oval almost.
So you probably destroyed cards in the process of cutting out the Wagner.
I don't know. Okay, there was no additional card on either side. The top and bottom were fairly straight, hand cut, but the sides were jumbo.
Most people haven't seen a Wagner uncut sheet. Is he in the middle of the sheet?
I don't know.
Oh, he had to have been if the borders were, if it was cut on all four sides, because if it was at the top or the bottom of the sheet.
Well, they were definitely all.
So he probably was in the middle of a sheet somewhere.
Well, yeah. So now I'm looking at
my Wagner experience later, because I've never seen a sheet. I'd only seen the little strip that was in house, which was like 5 or 6 cards on the strip, and it was in the middle of the strip, which tells me there were cards on the side for sure, because I saw the strip.
This sheet, I looked at it and I said to Sevchuk, I said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "This pile I'm standing here with was an uncut sheet, and someone cut it up." And he goes, "Oh, I don't know anything about that." Now I'm looking at the guy next to him, and I know that's the guy that cut the sheet up. And
I know trying to be politically nice and not
I know that's the guy who owns the card. Okay, but I don't say anything.
Looking back, thank God he cut it too big and not too small.
Well, yeah, thank God, but it was obvious he knew. He didn't know that there was a plank on the sheet too. He didn't know that the plank was valuable, and that was too small. Okay, so I'm looking at it and I go, Bob, I said, this is not a mint condition Wagner. Look at this thing. What is this? And I go, I'm not paying $25,000 for this.
No way. It's an atrocity as it sits right now.
I'm not even sure what I love it because the colors are so bright and and I want it, but I'm thinking, what do I do here? So I said, Bob, I gotta hold on. Run out.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of pause here. I'll skip ahead a little bit for the next clip that we're going to take. I wanted to let it run for a little bit to let him give you the background. And this whole thing about the card being oversized, which is kind of what we had heard for some time now, years and years at this point, because again, you're trimming it, and they take umbrage to the idea of trimming. I'll actually make sure I play that clip for you so that we got that context as well. But I will say this, the whole background, the flourish and the story behind it is all well and dandy. That's fine. But it does become a bit of a justification, though, given that already the card has been trimmed already once. So, thankfully, we got somebody who can trim it again to get it to a proper size. And that'll come up a little bit later. But just skipping ahead a little bit, basically, he ends up offering $25,000 for the entire collection. Originally, the deal was going to be $25,000 for the Wagner, but because obviously they cut up a bunch of the cards, he says, we'll take the whole collection for $25,000. They ended up coming to a deal with that. Done. And then it was Rob Lifson is the individual that was there with him, his partner in that. And I'll skip ahead a little bit, give you this short version. Basically, they had a debate over what they were going to do with the collection. And I believe, and again, you can watch the whole thing to get the whole version of it from Mastro himself. But in effect, they sold the majority of the cards for about $5,000. And then Mastro himself wanted to keep the Wagner. And he goes to great pains to emphasize, especially when it comes time to discuss the trimming of the card, that, he was going to be for his collection. He just wanted it for himself and all that. Again, all the justifications built into it. But the point was that he basically wanted to keep the card. And he already had another Honus Wagner that was in nice condition. So what he ended up doing is he ended up selling the other card for $30,000, I believe, is what he mentioned in there. And then that allowed him to be, in the black in this deal overall. And then and because of that, it justified basically them being able to pay $25,000 for the collection because they came out ahead and he got to keep the card. And then eventually, of course, the card would end up being sold. And then from there, it becomes the infamous Honus Wagner that gets graded by PSA as the infamous PSA 8 Honus Wagner. So that's kind of the background that leads into this whole bit. So we're going to skip ahead a bit because it does go on a little bit on this point. Again, I gave you the short version of that story, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the discussion of kind of the card itself and what happened with it, and also them trying to talk around the definition of trimming, which is kind of fun in its own way. But I want to kind of skip ahead to that piece, so we'll do that in the next cut here. All right, so this clip here, this section is going to be the first thought process talking about what he's thinking about doing with the card as they're driving away with it. So let me hit play on this one.
I go, I said, it's so huge. I think I could straighten the borders and it would still be one of the biggest Wagner cards in the hobby. And he goes, oh my gosh, goes, you would do that? I said, oh, I love it. I said, I just love it. I said, look, I know we own it together. We own all these cards together. Is there any way I can end up with this card? He says, what are you talking about? You already own the best Wagner card in the hobby. Why do you need another one? I said, well, maybe we could do something with my Wagner because, we do something with my Wagner card and we make some money on that. And then I end up with this card. I said, let's think about it, So, because I wanted to get the card home. So I get the card home and we sold all the other cards to Charlie Conlon, including the plank card, for like $5,000. All of them, the whole pile.
That hurts too. Oh my God.
That's $5,000, including the plank card. Okay, and so I've got it on my desk, and I'm looking at it for days, and I'm going, and I'm putting like straight edges on the sides, and I'm looking, and I'm thinking, man, this thing is just this should be mint, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I can cut it. I don't know if I have it in me to do it, And you have to remember something. There was no ill intent here. I wanted it for me. I wasn't going to do anything to it to deceive anyone.
Well, there was no grading company.
No, there were no grading companies.
Honestly, the father of modern trade, the father of the trading card category, pasted all his cards in a flipping book. So, like the idea of straight out of the pack condition only was just not really what it was. So people wanted nice copies, obviously, that weren't aesthetically pleasing. And I guess putting them in the book, they were still aesthetically pleasing. But that's consistent with the card. It's about it being aesthetically pleasing.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we shouldn't be able to cut up uncut sheets. It does not make sense. If the card is the right size, trimming implies that you've made the card smaller than its intended size. Now, I get it. T206s are all different sizes. Okay,
all right, I'm going to pause right there because that's the piece that I was waiting on that I wanted to make sure we quickly discussed. So that it implies that it's making it smaller than its intended size. So look, I understand in the hobby we have different definitions for things, but the word trimming has a definition. And I tend to subscribe to the definition of the dictionary, and I'll give it to you right now. It's very short. It's one sentence. Trimming is a noun, and one definition for it is small pieces trimmed off something. It's not making any suggestions about intent, and it's not making any suggestions about the size relative to intended. It's not talking about that. The word trimming is talking about small pieces trimmed off something. That's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about cutting something to take small pieces off, which is literally what he did. So by definition, it is trimming. So trying to talk your way around it, and bless good old BG, he's there. He's there to be part of the defense team. He's already like creating kind of the excuses for it. It's kind of fun watching the two of them play off each other, and like it's almost like they had the routine figured out and they were ready to go. Now, let me be clear about this. I don't care. I actually think the PSA 8 Honus Wagner is more interesting for its sordid backstory and history and everything. I actually think there aren't a ton of Honus Wagners out there, but it is a famous card. And they also mentioned earlier that they talk about Jefferson Burdick and kind of gave a little theory that, Jefferson Burdick had anointed that card, but then they don't really have any idea why. And it's kind of lost to the sands of time of why specifically that card was singled out as being this icon that would eventually move forward. But the reality of it is that then from there, we move on to the discussion of trying to justify trimming from the perspective of, well, there were no grading companies at the time. Well, it was just intended for me. There was no malintent. Well, the definition doesn't talk about intent, and it doesn't talk about anything related to size relative to what is expected. And he's also trying to justify cutting an uncut sheet, which at the end of the day, hey, you do you. And and Brian also makes the point that Beckett did accept cut sheet cards. So, which is a thing. That's a real thing. And they didn't mark them as a separate thing, which is also true. But again, it comes down to the idea of kind of justification after the fact. But just to be we're on the same page here, so we're all clear. The definition of trimming can be something as simple as small pieces trimmed off something. That's one very clear definition. It has nothing to do with intent. It has nothing to do with the size relative to what is expected. So that whole justification is something they made up in their heads. Just so we're all on the same page here. But let continue.
There's no uniform size. There's no uniform size. Well, here, I'll give you an idea. Okay, so I call Lifson up and I said, listen, here's what I want to do. I want the card. Let's sell my card. My card will become Mars. Let's sell it to Barry Halper for $30,000. Okay, and I'll keep this card. And he said, "What are you going to do with it?" I said, "Well, I'm gonna cut it. I'm gonna straighten the board."
What does he say right then? What's his first reaction?
He goes to me. He goes. Well, are you sure you want to do that? I said, "Look, I think it'll come out looking absolutely gorgeous, and I want it. I want it for me." And I said, "I'm going to keep it." And he goes, "Okay." He goes. So he calls Halper. Halper buys my card for $30,000, and I get the cutting board out, and I've got it on my desk, and I had the phone.
When you say cutting board, is this like a paper cutter like we know today?
An old paper cutter. Yeah, I still have it. Yeah, I still have it.
And by the way, if you
yes,
ever,
I know.
I told Bill before this, and many times, that if that thing ever leaves your possession, this is an example of what I'm telling you guys who are watching this. If there's something you want desperately, you pay whatever it takes. And I told Bill, and I'll make the donation to charity or give him money. I want the paper cutter because honestly, to me, it's the second most important relic in the history of the hobby behind the card, because it's iconic to me because I think it's part of a story. It's like when you hear Eddie Goodell's story. There's so many great things about the story, but like things that are critical.
It doesn't look like much. I mean, it's just.
Guess what? Neither does the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
So we've been there.
Okay,
I'm interrupting you.
That's actually a callback to earlier in the discussion where they talked about the Mona Lisa and how did the Mona Lisa become this iconic painting, even though it's not a particularly attractive painting or particularly interesting, making the comparison to how the Wagner became the card versus just any other card that could have been. One other thing, when he was having this discussion, now that I think about it a little bit more, this is what happens when you go past midnight, Carlos. So now my head's going a little bit. And I'm wondering, if BG still had Leaf, if he got his hands on that paper cutter, on that machine, I bet you could cut that up in pieces and put it in a card. There you go. A piece of hobby history. Fractionalize it. Cut it up into little pieces and put it in a card, BG. There's still time. All you got to do is get Master. You got to offer Master enough money. You can get yourself a hobby relic. This was the paper cutter that cut the Wagner. See, I'm giving the man free ideas. You're welcome. All right, let that play a little bit further. I just a thought that came to mind when he was talking with such reverence about the iconic thing, the paper cutter that cut the Wagner. But let's let it proceed here.
So you say I want to cut this thing because I want to.
So I have the card.
There's no grading companies.
No. So I have
people look at the card in its pure form. What is it? What does it look like? Is it about the right size? When someone buys a card, that's what they're looking for, right?
I just don't think anyone in their right mind would have left it the way it was. It really was.
It's like if someone took a Hostess cupcake sheet, the Hostess cards,
yeah, sure.
or postcards and cut them past the perforations. Someone might have further cut them to the perforations because that's where it should have been cut the first time. And so is that really an alteration? Like, I don't know. This is.
I don't feel like it is. Okay, so all right, so.
Well, I'm glad the defense team is agreed. Listen, guys, we don't feel like it's an alteration, so I don't know if it is. It's an alteration, man. I like the fact. Look, the man is working hard. He's got the Hostess, but they cut him in the perforations, the hand cut. It's like guys, you could literally put in. It really shouldn't be in a PSA 8 holder at this point, since we all know it should be in an authentic altered holder. But like I said earlier, for me, for the story of that particular card, I actually still think the card itself is an iconic card. I still think the backstory of it and the sordid history of it and the fact that Gretzky, McNall owned it and all this stuff, and John. Yeah, I think it was Gretzky McNall owned it, I think, in 91. So all this stuff surrounding this card and the mystique behind the card for the longest time, I think it's still a very valuable card. Even as an authentic altered, I actually still think the card would still go for massive dollars if it ever went back on the marketplace. It's just not a PSA 8 because, yes, it is altered, guys. Try as you might to work your way around it, try to redefine what trimming is and the whole... It's an altered card. It's okay, guys. It's an altered card. But trust me, I'm a doctor. In the hobby, I don't have any credentials, but in the hobby, you don't need to be a real doctor to be a doctor. Look back at the live stream for further references, but the point is, that's fine. So yeah, it is an altered card. It's fine, guys. It's an altered card. Let's move on. But let it play on.
I get Lifson on the phone. He's on the phone, and he's listening. And I said, okay, I'm going to cut the card now. He goes, oh my God. He goes, why am I on the phone? I said, I want you to hear it.
Oh my God. I'd be freaking out.
Yeah. So I cut the two borders. Okay. Just the two side borders. Do you know that if you show that card to most people, They think that I cut the top and bottom. And let me tell you something. I was tempted to make them straighter, but I didn't, because I didn't want the card to be too small. And if you take that T206 Wagner card and you get all the Wagner cards in the hobby and you put them all end to end from largest to smallest, it's one of the biggest. It's absolutely
and
one
to
of the
give
biggest.
people some color here, and when Beckett grading first started, they would grade cards that were sheet cut.
Yep.
And their critical mistake was they didn't label the slab sheet cut.
Well, PSA did too, but they just didn't know it.
They just didn't know it. But Beckett knew it. But I was in a hotel room in Addison, Texas, with the biggest cutter of sheets. I won't say his name because he's not really in the hobby anymore, but he's been somewhat famous / infamous. And this guy bought 100 sheets of 85 tops, and with a paper cutter, cut every McGuire out. And I looked at them and I was like, hold on, these are all too big. And he says, and that's how sheet cut cards get put in slabs, because no one ever makes cards larger when they alter them. They make them smaller.
Yep.
And so he cut them all too big, and they all would end up in the slab because they were too big. They weren't minimum size requirement or whatever terms they use. In contrast, it might have been maximum, exceeds maximum size, but it was just, this has been around forever. And the fact is, there's been a great discussion forever of, if a machine cuts a sheet or a person cuts a sheet, the card was intended to not be sold on the sheet. It was never intended for sale in that way.
Well, I always found it offensive when people would talk to me about trimming the Wagner card, because I never felt that way. And you have to remember something. I wanted that card for myself. I got rid of the best Wagner card in the hobby to keep that card for myself. But that was when I had paid.
Objection. It's still trimmed by definition. And also how you felt about it is irrelevant. And that your intention to keep the card, you didn't keep the card. You still sold the card. So, you know, I guess if BG is going to play the defense, I'll play the prosecution. Irrelevant. That would be kind of my pushback on this. But hey, keep working on it, man. You guys keep trying to argue in circles around that. It's a very interesting thing to try to argue. Although, again, from a redemption tour standpoint, I kind of get it. Let's diminish it. But again, I'm not morally offended. Cut your damn cards. You own the card, do whatever the hell you want with it. But then don't try after the fact to be like, well, I did it, but it wasn't altering. It wasn't really trimming. I don't think it was trimming. If I don't think it's trimming, then it can't be trimming. And it was like, no, that's not how this works, sir. But go on, sir.
$25,000 for it. A year later, somebody comes along and offers me $100,000. I'm like, wow, that's insane. Okay. And you know, for that year, when people looked at the card, no one thought anything of it. I never, I didn't hide the fact that it was from an uncut sheet.
The buyer never looked and said, hey, where did this come from? I want to know the whole history of the card.
We never went into it. You know, I brought it out to California, and he looked at it. He loved it. Craig Buzino loved it. I loved it. I still love it. Whether it was in a PSA holder or not, okay, never, you know, because you have to remember, PSA didn't exist. So it was just a gorgeous Wagner card, the most gorgeous Wagner card. And interestingly, I was out in San Luis Obispo, and I called the Mercedes-Benz dealership from the airport.
Okay, as interesting as it is that he bought a car, the next piece is that he bought a car. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but I want to also point out here in that section, he talked around it. If you paid attention, he said he didn't hide the fact that it was done, but then Brian Gray asked him if he said anything, and he's like, it didn't come up. Basically, the upshot of it is that so it sounds an awful lot like he didn't say that how this card came to be. He's like, well, he looked at it and he was happy with it. It's like, okay, Again, I'm not the morality police here, but I'm just gonna say that you said something without saying something. You didn't really disclose that you had the old cutting machine in the back there. That's what I'm taking away from this. And if you want to suggest otherwise, you could have been a little bit more clear. Just throwing it out there. But, sir, to each their own. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here, and we'll get to the final piece. So we'll use the magic of editing for this. Okay, so I was going to skip ahead a little bit further, but I forgot about this gem. Allow the defense lawyer to add one more piece here. So let's let BG go off on this piece here.
But again, I think you painstakingly made sure it was the right size, correct?
Oh, I was. That's what kept me from doing
That's a distinction
in the top and bottom board.
I think that's a distinction that people have to understand.
Relevance
is, and now we see with grading, the companies, their primary concern, and yes, they'll see things that they don't like where it looks like a sheet cut, they won't put it in a slab for whatever reason. But there was a time where they really were like, the card just needs to measure correctly. Now, the nefarious in the industry, now what they do is they will flatten the card.
They crush them. Yeah.
And make it too big.
Yeah.
So that they can cut it down and it measures. And I've talked to people at the grading companies who are like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
These guys, every card they send us is perfect. It measures correctly. and we don't know what they're doing.
Yep.
And it's like, if you're making a pizza and you want to size it perfectly, do you spread out the dough to exactly the size you want it to be, or do you make it bigger and then cut around? Or a cookie? You have to have more dough there than the cookie cutter is so that it's correct. And I think that's what they're doing, is they're spreading the dough to cut it. The fact is, it's a more nefarious process, or I say a nefarious process, when someone flattens the card to cut it, rather they take it in the state they inherited and correctly size it. It's almost like
No. I'm going to go with no. But that is your opinion. You're certainly entitled to it. I'm going to go with a no on that, though. I appreciate the effort, though. Like the mental gymnastics that you figured out to make this work. It's actually fascinating. It's a fascinating case study. Well, look, Bill Mastro just needed Brian Gray this whole time, and it would have saved him years of being in exile. But let's move on here a little bit.
like fixing a car. You fix something that was not done correctly. And again, this is a tough one because some people say, Brian, you're wrong. This is altering a card for the purpose of, increasing the value from what it really is.
Yes.
But I don't know. So kind of fill in the blanks. You're like, you were nervous at first, but then you said, hey, I'm cutting it to the correct size. I do not want it to be the wrong size. I want it to be like the card was supposed to be in the first place.
And I wanted it for me.
You didn't color it. Yeah, you didn't color it. You
No,
didn't bleach
I
it.
didn't have to do
You didn't do all this stuff that's designed to make it look like something it's not.
Relevance.
You just wanted the card to be the size it was supposed
And
to be.
it's. I mean, you've seen the card.
Yeah.
It's just the most magnificent item in the hobby.
And you're going to keep it.
That was my intention.
If you look at the hobby now, people care more about eye appeal than the grade in many cases.
They do.
I've always said that when I buy a 52 mantle, the best one I'm ever going to own is probably going to be an authentic altered copy, because I'm going to buy an authentic altered that looks like a 7 or an 8.
Yep.
Because I would rather have that in my collection, authentic altered,
I
than
understand that.
a 1 or a 2 that's wrinkled so bad that
Yeah.
Mickey looks like they pictured him yesterday on the card. He's in the grave, and that's how he looks now. That's what some of these mantle rookies look like. And I understand people who are purists, but I would rather have an authentic altered copy that is just stunning and presents the art the way it was intended to be presented.
So that part I actually have no issue with. In the past, I've talked about on the live stream and in other places that I have zero problem with authentic altered cards because they can present extremely well. From an eye appeal perspective, you can get actually a really nice looking card that costs you a lot less. So from a value perspective, from a collective perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as it is labeled correctly and disclosed correctly. The entire discussion that they kind of skated around is that Mastro talked about several times that his intention was to keep it for himself, but you did. You did sell the card. So it's irrelevant what your original intention was. Your original intention is literally irrelevant. If you had kept the card to this very day, dude, cut it in half. Draw a little stickman on the back of it. Do whatever the hell you want. It's your damn card. You could write Bill was here on the back of the card. It's perfectly within your realm. It's your property. As soon as you transfer it over, though, again, it might not have come up in conversation, but you did do something where the person may not be as knowledgeable on it, and they might not be able to tell that it was cut. But you knew. You knew precisely what you did because you're the one who literally did it. Again, per your discussion and description here. So, again, the mental gymnastics here are awe-inspiring, truly. It's actually very impressive how they managed this one. Now, I think there's one more clip I want to play, so I'll do a little editing here and see if I can get to the last one that I want to go, because I want to keep it more reasonable. But there are definitely some interesting little tidbits here that I took from this one, so let's move on.
So now people are more accepting of that. So you would think that we've evolved a little bit from the brainwashing of, whatever's supposed to be right, they say or not, to we care about eye appeal. So that's where you were back then. You cared about eye appeal. So
And
continue the story. So you cut,
I just
stopped crying on the line, and are you like, I got it right the first time, it's perfect? You didn't
Oh,
want to
absolutely. Yep. And I never wavered from the fact that I thought it was the most spectacular thing that I ever saw. And I still feel that way. And, I'm not, look, I don't have $50 million to spend on a baseball card. But, when that card, if it ever gets sold, which
It's
probably
minimum
will, at least not in our lifetimes, maybe, that card is going to be, that card's going to set world records. And it's not going to set world records, or people are not going to shy away from it because they know the story of what Bill Mastro did. They're going to look at the card and they're going to say, that's the most magnificent item in the entire hobby.
I gotta be honest, I think the story enhances the value. It's almost like people.
So that I agree with. That kind of plays into what I talked about a little bit earlier. All right, so this will be the last clip that I'll play for you on this one, but this is kind of a fun exchange back and forth. Again, it follows the theme of what we talked about. Again, this is the more interesting stuff. Once you get past that hour and 6 minute mark, like I'm at an hour 35. So it's really gets interesting for about 25, 30 minutes here, and then I'll summarize the last piece at the end. But again, link in the description if you want to listen to the whole thing unfiltered from beginning to end. But check out this exchange here. This is kind of fun.
You never talked about this, but did you ever have other situations where you felt like you needed to make a card look like it was originally designed to look, or was this truly a one-off circumstance?
No, this was definitely a unique circumstance for that kind of situation. I abhor the stuff that's been going on in the hobby with the trimming and the coloring and the squashing and I guess, hey, look, here's my attitude. And I had this discussion with the government when they were questioning me. If the card had a crease and the crease was taken out, and you can't tell that the crease was taken out, where's the damn issue? Okay,
that's a great question, because now, and again, I like the guys at CGC, the comic side. I work with the card side, but they actually will press your comic book. You send them a comic book that's wrinkled, and before they grade it, they will actually press out the wrinkles. The grading company will take the wrinkles out before they book. So
that's great. Why?
It is. And honestly, I'm an advocate. If PSA ever hired me as a consultant, which I can't because I have another gig now, but I would tell PSA, I believe you should have a different grading scale for cards that you believe are altered. And I think, honestly, a card that's been trimmed should still be graded. And I think it should be AA9, AA8, AA7, which basically grades the eye appeal of a card that has been altered or restored. And I don't want to just say altered, I'll say restored. Because there are cards that have staining that I think as a clean card would have more value to someone from an eye appeal standpoint than it's just being a relic in its condition.
But again, if you cannot detect the alteration, okay, in any way, shape, or form, is it altered?
Well, if it's altered probably. But I think that's the question we really have to ask ourselves is, why are trading cards the only asset class where an alteration we think spoils something instead of
preserve?
No. If you have a 57 Chevy where the carburetor has been replaced with a modern version, you just sell a 57 Chevy with a modern, and someone pays a little bit less, but it's still a 57 Chevy.
Right.
So that card
in all these museums in the world, the vast majority of the artifacts, including especially the artworks, have some degree of restoration or preservation. Okay.
These paintings from the 1200s or 1000, they're not existing in their perfect form without any level of alteration, preservation, or restoration.
I was at Sotheby's for years. I was always a night owl. I would work because you couldn't get any work done there during the day. I'd go in at 3, 4 in the afternoon. I'd work all night. I'd be the only one in the building with the security guards. And who else? The restorers. The building was full of restorers, working on things. I'd order pizzas and everybody be in my office eating pizzas. Okay. I mean, it's crazy to think that these things don't deserve some kind of respect in terms of, don't get me wrong. I think there's certain places I just don't want to go. But I don't really, no one will ever convince me that what I did with that Wagner card was wrong in any way, shape, or form.
And you never had a legal problem on the Wagner card?
No, I never. No, that was always a marquee thing. It was a promo thing for the government. It had nothing to do with my case. Nothing.
Because fundamentally, whether you agree or disagree about the purity of the card at that stage, legally it doesn't change anything. I mean, there was no fraud. It's not like you sold it and said, hey, this card is exactly as it came out of the pack, yada, yada, yada. It was what it was. You looked at it, you could measure it, you could do everything you want to do to it. You could have taken it to a forensic paper examiner if such a thing existed then and had them look at it. You could have done anything. So I don't think it was fraud in that sense. And that's the problem is with the narrative that's out there. People act like this was like the most grievous act in the history of the hobby when it's not even remotely close. Hell, that store where they killed the store owner is 50 billion times worse than anything we're talking about here. Yet.
All right, that's enough. The whataboutism is where it gets a little bit fun. It goes off the rails a little bit. And apparently Brian Gray wants to pitch for like a hobby Hall of Fame, I guess, and he'll vote for Mastro. The important thing. You kind of got the gist of it from these clips anyway. So I will welcome you to go and check out the rest of it. There's about 20 more minutes left of it, and they kind of talk back and forth a little bit about his, kind of his history in the hobby, getting back into it. And Brian Gray kind of does deflection for him on, the critiques and criticism on, and, the trolls that have said mean things about him and everything. And look, I leave it to you to decide where you stand on that whole thing. I did think the mental gymnastics, though, was a lot of fun to watch. And Brian was there, man. He was there for the full defense to help out his buddy there at part of the Bill Mastro Goodwill Tour. If you are interested in the history of Mastro, he does give a little bit of his background leading into his collecting. He doesn't touch on the auction housing thing too much. He talks about some early Sotheby's things that he was involved in. And then obviously there is the extensive section here about the Wagner, which is really the part that I think a lot of us are interested in. I will say, if you didn't know too much about the card before, it is interesting to get his perspective. Obviously, it is one side of the equation. There have been other things shared in the past and articles written and books written. They push back against a lot of it. But I'll be honest, having read The Card, which is the one book there that they had a lot of issue with, I don't think we've materially changed anything. I don't feel like I learned anything so completely new that materially changes my thoughts on the Wagner. That's why I think it's kind of funny that Brian tried to make this into like this incredible thing that it changes everything about the way we look at it. It's like, no, it doesn't. It's basically you defending your buddy, which is fine. It's perfectly okay. Same thing happened with Prostein. It was the same kind of deal. But at the same time, the arguments used here I don't think hold water. Although it's funny that basically the argument, the talking points that they use here about restoration and then the comic pressing and everything were literally the discussion we had. I think the obvious next move, to me, is Brian Gray, Bill Mastro, Kurt's Card Care collab. Yes. The titans of the hobby getting together for the greater something. Something. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Very interesting, I will say. Tells you kind of where we're sitting at as far as hobby news. Like I said, in the old days, I would have done literally like segment by segment and done a whole thing, and my video would have been longer than the than the actual interview was. But a lot of it kind of centered around a lot of stuff that honestly I wasn't terribly interested in. But if you listen to it like in a podcast style, it's not bad. And I will give credit to Brian Gray for bringing this to the table anyway, even if the arguments are a little bit questionable. Obviously, there is an agenda to it, and you can make out the agenda pretty quickly. That it is kind of trying to humanize Bill Mastro in a certain way, and try to justify some of what he did, allow him to make his argument, make his case. I'll leave it to you if you agree or disagree with his arguments. I don't agree with a lot of the arguments here. I think they're a little bit flimsy. And again, trimming has a definition. The Wagner is an altered card, and I do think there was some misrepresentation there. It was kind of a crime by omission rather than the commission, because at the end of the day, when you own the card, you can do whatever the hell you want. That's my opinion. But it is when you sell it, it was the lack of disclosure that's problematic. And Brian is technically correct that from the perspective that if it didn't come up in conversation and you left it out, knowing what you know, it is very murky. It's kind of that, gray area there. But if you had been explicitly asked, I think it's one of those situations where I think it would have been the legally correct thing to say exactly what you did. But I guess the question was, if the other person doesn't ask, then what is your actual responsibility? I leave that to the lawyers. Not my place to figure that part of it out. But anyway, kind of interesting conversation. I thought I would share that one with you. Been a while since I did a reaction/thoughts video. So there you go. We had that one there. More videos coming up on the channel. Live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're 5% less mature than the podcast episodes that drop on Tuesday. I've got some other ideas for some videos that I'd like to do, but this one kind of dropped in my lap, so I thought I would take advantage of it. Also gives me a chance to test out this thing. So we'll see if this works. If you're seeing this video, it means that the system worked. And maybe I'll utilize this again in the future, and we may do a live stream using this to give it to put it through its full paces, as I will probably need a replacement for StreamYard. So nonetheless, so that's it for me this time around. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.